Hello there. This is All British Comedy Explained. I'm Abigoliah, and with me is Tom Salinsky.
Hello there.
Guys, our guest today is one of the most successful and prolific comedy writers in the world, equally here in the UK. He's written stage plays, novels, musical, stand-up comedy, and one of the most successful sitcom writers. He is the mind behind The Young Ones, Filthy Rich and Cat Flap, Blackadder, Upstart Crow, and countless others. Guys, we got Ben Elton, baby.
I'm absolutely thrilled. This is kind of a dream come true. When I was about 13 or 14, I can remember watching Saturday Live, which he eventually became the regular host of, but he always had a stand-up slot on. And it was the only thing we could talk about in the playground the next day because I was a comedy nerd even at that age. So to get to spend an hour just chatting to him about comedy is the thrill of my life.
He's amazing. And we talked about The Young Ones, of course, because if you haven't listened to our episode about The Young Ones, please go back and check it out. We also talked a lot about stand-up and Blackadder, so there's a little bit of everything in here. We only had an hour. We could have talked to him forever. We didn't even get into novels. We didn't get into the plays. We didn't even talk about musicals. We had he's just done so much. He's done so much. Shall we just get into it?
Let's get into it.
Let's do it. All right, guys, here's Ben Elton.
The Spontaneity Shop presents All British Comedy Explained with Abigoliah Schamaun and Tom Salinsky. This episode, Ben Elton.
Officially, Ben, thank you so much for coming on All British Comedy Explained.
Yeah, I can't promise to explain anything. Certainly not all of it, but I'm very happy to be here.
So if you haven't had time to dip into the podcast, and I don't think you would, the premise of the podcast is I live in the UK, but I have seen shockingly little British comedy television. So Tom is taking me through all of the great British comedies. So I have gone from never seeing The Young Ones to loving The Young Ones to then learning you wrote The Young Ones to falling down a rabbit hole of watching all of your stand-up to becoming a huge fan to reading your book to now interviewing you. So it's been quite a whiplash for the past couple weeks for me.
Wow, they call it a deep dive, don't they, those young people? Well, it sounds like a great pod. I don't listen to kind of comedy comment podcast. I occasionally listen to political ones, but podcasts have so far kind of not really caught me up. I tend to listen to music when I'm on my cross trainer, but very, very happy to be on a podcast.
I mean, it's probably not to discourage our listeners from listening to our podcast, but for you, probably listening to a podcast where people deconstruct comedy is a little bit like work. You're like, I kind of do this.
Well, I think it would probably, I don't know, it might annoy me a bit. I find this deconstruction, certainly maybe not amongst professionals. I mean, clearly I know you're a comic.
Yes.
I don't know about you, Tom. You're a playwright.
Well,
I know. I've seen
yes.
one of your brilliant plays. I don't know. I think deconstructing comedy on the whole tends to happen when critics tell me my stuff isn't funny, going for something easy or whatever. I mean, my definition of a critic is somebody who claims Pinter was a comedy writer. So, on the whole, I think people who think funny means you should be able to think about, oh, yes, that was very witty. If you're saying, oh, that was awfully witty, then it probably wasn't very funny at all, because comedy, for me, really is direct. A laugh, like a tear, is something that begins in the, with the emotions rather than with the intellect.
Yeah, it's an involuntary response, laughter, isn't it? And that's kind of a weird thing.
Yeah, I think so. And that's why the sort of sound of people sort of pretending to laugh. I mean, I'm not going to mention Pinter again, but sometimes that which we're told is funny, and people feel embarrassed, so they feel they ought to, is a sad sound. A real laugh is one we all recognize, and we know the fake type as well.
So, what were the things that were making you laugh before you were doing this professionally? Like when you were growing up, what were the things that were the big influences on you? Who were you a fan of?
Yeah, I mean, I think they were influences. I certainly didn't see them as influences at the time because obviously I didn't know where I was going to go with my life. They were just something I absolutely loved. I loved comedy as a kid. Funnily enough, I nowadays I consume very little of it. But when I was a kid and a teenager, it was pretty much all I was interested in. I absolutely loved all the comedy that was on the telly in the 70s. It was something of a golden age, or the obviously brilliant stuff. Dad's Army, I think, arguably the best British sitcom of all time. Fawlty Towers, arguably the best British sitcom of all time. I think those two fight it out. But I also love the stuff that wasn't necessarily considered quite so. The ITV did some great comedies in the 60s and 70s on the buses. Please, Sir, with John Alderton. This is stuff which sadly Abigoliah I have to seek some of these out. I loved Steptoe. I loved, it was a great, British comedy was very good. Not just narrative comedy, sitcoms, but also I wasn't a fan of stand-up, but stand-up wasn't seen much on the telly. I mean, Bruce Forsyth was on the telly a lot, but not as a stand-up. Tommy Trinder, not as if they were there to host shows. Stand-up really only appeared on the telly in any great amounts when a show called The Comedians, which was an ITV show, started to broadcast, which was a showcase of almost exclusively, but not exclusive, almost exclusively, sort of white male working class comedians. There was a famous black one, Charlie Williams, hello Flower, who was a black comedian who obviously did amazingly to the breakthrough in working men's clubs in the 50s and 60s. But he was born in Britain, as evidenced by his accent, his Yorkshire accent. I didn't look at it as stand-up. I loved Morecambe and Wise, double acts, Morecambe and Wise, and of course the two Ronnies, but above all Morecambe and Wise. And then my greatest influence of all probably wasn't on the telly. It was literature. It was P.G. Wodehouse. I would say P.G. Wodehouse was almost the voice that really alerted me to the idea of the joy of writing comedy as opposed to performing it. The fact that when I was young, I didn't tend to read many books. My mum and dad would love me to have read more books, and I tended to like comics. And so one day they gave me, I was 12 or 13, a book of P.G. Wodehouse short stories called Eggs, Beans and Crumpets, which is just one of his many, 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 many publications. I mean, of course, there's hundreds of them. And I immediately fell in love and consumed almost nothing but Wodehouse for the next 3 years. And I think he's the greatest. I think he's the greatest comic voice in English letters. For me, remains so. And his ability to time a gag on a page, his ability to actually make you laugh out loud on the page. I don't think any adaptations have ever remotely done him justice. He works on the page so much better. I mean, when they're adapted, they tend to be sort of whimsical and nostalgic and just really about, wasn't it, this marvelous sort of sunshine world of posh boys and silly girls, and but actually,
or worse, I think the ones that turn it into a cartoon. The Blandings adaptation recently was all kind of bright colours and people pulling faces and falling over, and I just thought this has nothing to do with the Woodhouse. Like you, I grew up so enjoying.
It's yet to be got right, but yeah, well, the P.G. Wodehouse, I think, is if I could name one comic influence, I would say it was P.G. Wodehouse. But after that, it would be TV comedy on the BBC and ITV in the 70s.
I think I can see little echoes of Jeeves and Wooster, particularly in Blackadder. You know, the young master getting into scrapes, Queenie as a sort of avatar of the of Aunt Dahlia, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that his influence on anybody who's read him will be highly influenced by him. But even if you haven't read him, because everyone else has read him and has been influenced by him, I mean, Stephen Fry's a huge fan, and his work, reflects that. As is, I mean, Hugh doesn't write so much, but I mean, even in his performances, and Hugh does write some. Yeah, I think it's reflected in my writing. I think I learned how to time a gag on the page from Woodhouse. I didn't know I was learning. I was just being taught by example.
So you started off in writing plays and stuff in uni, right? Or college, as you call it.
Yeah, earlier than that, I was writing I was committed to being a writer from really reading Woodhouse, and a little bit of Noel Coward goes in there as well.
Mhm.
And I was basically, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was a child. Most children don't. But I found out very early on, when I was 10 or 11, I started appearing in Dram productions. First one was J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. I was one of the Lost Boys. I played Slightly Soiled and got a few laughs, and was immediately bitten by the sort of entertainment bug and felt I want to be in entertainment. And I imagined I wanted to be an actor. But very soon, by my early teens, I was pretty clear that I wanted to be a writer. And it would be Woodhouse, and it would also be Noel Coward. When I was 13, in 1973, I guess I'd have been 13 or 14, Noel Coward was 70, and the BBC, there was a lot of stuff celebrating his life. Funnily enough, some of your listeners won't even have heard of him. I mean, it was a time when he was one of the most famous people in the world. I mean, at one point, he represented the 1920s culturally almost as much as the Beatles represented the 60s. I mean, he was the most prominent cultural British figure of the 1920s, so in popular culture. And he was a great playwright and a great wit. He wrote astonishingly funny songs. And the BBC did a documentary about him, and I didn't know his plays, I didn't know his songs, but I fell in love immediately with his life very quickly. I bought an album of, Mad Dogs and Englishmen and the Stately Homes of England. I mean, hilarious, brilliant lyric writing.
In tropical climes, there are certain times of day when all the citizens retired tear their clothes off and perspire. It's one of those rules that the greatest fools obey because the sun is far too sultry and one must avoid the Bob little rain.
And I went and saw Hay Fever with my mum at the Even Honor Theatre, Guildford. That no doubt was probably part of the celebrations. And that Hay Fever was one of his very early plays and remains a brilliant light comedy of manners and situation and language, of course. You must wash more, dear. It's bad for your skin to leave things lying about on it. He wrote that when he was 23, I think. I mean, so Noel Coward was also a real influence. So Coward and Woodhouse probably alerted me to the power of language and the joy of language and the joy of comic language more than any other influences. I mean, I don't know if it's true. I mean, this is how I've worked it out retrospectively, but I think it was that year, 73, when I first discovered P.G. Woodhouse and I first discovered Noel Coward, and I was 13 and 14, already constantly doing Dram all the time. I was played the common man in Man for All Seasons that year, I think, or the year after, which is a beautifully written play. And I knew I wanted to be a writer. I never wanted to be a stand-up. I never wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be a writer. Or any performing I do is just a conduit, is just an expression of me as a writer.
What I'm finding so interesting about this conversation is, so I was about the age that you're talking about when The Young Ones was on TV. And I can remember how it felt like this completely new voice, this like kicking down the doors, and the stuffy establishment figures hated it. They thought it was ridiculous. They thought it was vulgar. There's that incredibly painful story you tell in your book about Ronnie Barker, one of your heroes, having a go at you at a party for swearing on TV, which apart from anything else you hadn't done. But I think it's fascinating that actually you're drawing on these influences like Woodhouse and Coward, that all the people who were rejecting The Young Ones would have completely embraced.
Oh yeah, I mean that's. I mean it's scarcely a surprise, really. I mean the shock of the new always irritates. I'm 66. I have to make an effort not to be irritated by terribly successful young people doing stuff I'd never thought of. I mean I think I manage it. I mean I don't think I am a curmudgeon remotely in the way Barker was, but then in a way I am the beneficiary.
And Corbett wasn't.
Corbett, not so. I'm sure he certainly wasn't as pompous. I mean, Ronnie Barker was pompous. He was a lovely man, and or at least I got to know him a little bit later, and he was fine and a great comic talent, but definitely very aware of his own. He was, he liked to be called the governor at the BBC. I think it might be his idea. Just call me the governor. Corbett less so, but then I got to know Ronnie much later, and I asked him to be on my show, and he was kind of in a way looking for a gig at that point. We all have ups and downs in our career, and Ronnie was certainly in a dip after Ronnie B retired. The fact that I have influences which might be considered vaguely conservative, with a small c, I'm not interested in the politics of either Coward or Woodhouse. I mean, they probably were conservative with a large C, but that's irrelevant to their work. I mean, and I was as influenced, as I say, by the, I'd say an equal influence were great British sitcoms. I just didn't think about the writers when I was watching. I mean, I'm an evangelist for flying the flag of Galton and Simpson, who wrote Tony Hancock and Steptoe and Son, and whenever I see 60s playwrights eulogized for their exploration of the sort of gritty working class, I think, why are Galton and Simpson not if ever there was an exploration of mutually dependent bleak existences, it's Arthur and Albert Steptoe. That's real kitchen sink stuff, never mind fucking John Osborne and his his entertainer. You want to look at the entertainer, then look at Tommy Cooper. But look, my influences are not surprisingly good stuff. And each generation is, most of the angry young men supposedly of the 50s turned out to be rabid Tories, particularly John Osborne. I'm not, and, but I don't think being seen as a slightly radical artist necessarily means you're radical politically. Noel Coward was absolutely the young one of his generation. Hay Fever in 1924 shocked. It was the shocking comedy of a drug-fueled youth. With hints of incest and homosexuality and plenty of drugs. But of course he was a deeply conservative figure in every way, despite being a closeted gay man. But the funny thing is, I think the young ones was seen as kind of anarchic and groundbreaking, but actually the things that were identified as being its most special groundbreaking things, I think, were its least. I mean, people think, oh, look, and it was a sitcom in which you had talking rats and walls were, people appeared through walls and there were cartoon figures and a band played in the middle, and all these things were seen as, terribly groundbreaking. And yes, they were very different to the slight rut that BBC comedy had got into in the 70s. Got very middle class. Sitcoms tended to be rings on their fingers. The Good Life, good shows, but they were very much not what you'd call groundbreaking. But actually, what the young ones was doing, so much of what was considered anarchic was a total part of comedy tradition. You look at the Crazy Gang; they came through walls, they smashed up. You look at Morecambe and Wise in terms of strangeness. Think of those two old men sitting in bed together, endlessly rehashing their youth. Never mind Vladimir and Astrogon passing the time. Eric and Ernie in bed. That's wow. That's, if you want to look at what was weird in the, and interesting. In a shared double bed, sipping their cocoa, talking about their sort of frustrations with each other. And how actually they hate each other, but they're irritating each other, a kind of mutual dependency. And, look at the Laurel and Hardy, for instance, again, talk an anarchic relationship of furious mutual interdependency with lots of violence, lots of cartoon violence. I think.
Or I'm thinking of Hell's a Poppin'. You ever seen that?
Hell's a Poppin', or the Goons.
Yes.
So, the Goons were in a way a sitcom. They all kind of lived in a sort of world together. Doors would knock and people came in and out. So actually the things people think of as groundbreaking for the young ones, I don't think were particularly. Certainly the young ones came along at a point where sitcom had got a little bit cozy. The great working class, Steptoe and Till Death Us Do Part in the 60s was a really radical, a really dangerous, it was across generational warfare was explored in depth. That was, and they were really angry with each other. That wasn't like cozy like Sid James in Man About the House, where he gets a bit annoyed because his son's a bit of a hippie. But no, I mean, in Till Death Us Do Part, the battles between Alf Garnett and the Scouse Git, played by Tony Booth, with his girl with Eunice stuff, and also the exploration of race and bigotry. And working class people who see themselves more as identified with Tory lords, Alf Garnett was like, "Oh, Winston Churchill, he's your man," never mind that Harold. So there've been so much radical comedy on the telly, and in terms of sitcom in the 60s, but in the 70s less so, and perhaps that's why we were seen as breaking traditions, whereas in fact, actually, we were picking up a ball that had only been dropped a decade or so before. What I think was more interesting about the young ones was that it was a youth sitcom, and even Till Death Us Do Part couldn't be called that, even though it had very strong young characters with Eunice Stubbs and Tony Booth. But sitcom hadn't tended to feature young people in anything other than peripheral roles, frustrating older people. The young people were there to sort of be oh, you're a hippie, or whatever. But where we did a sitcom about young people, specifically about a bunch of young people in Thatcher's Britain, and with the exception of Mike and the character, which didn't really work, but that I go into that at length in my autobiography, because it would have worked. But let's not unpack that now.
Yeah.
But if you look at the hippie, the aging hippie, and the sort of hangover hippie, the punk Vivian, and the nascent Tory councillor Rick's character, pretending he was an anarchist when clearly he had deeply conservative. I think they were really true, if exaggerated, youth types in the early years of Thatcher's Britain. I mean, a very specific type, middle-class students. But I think that was quite groundbreaking in terms of the young ones. It was a sitcom about people in their very early 20s. And that, I think, was new. The bands playing and the rats talking, I think, was part of a lengthy tradition of blending variety with sitcom.
You play a few small parts in some of the episodes. I know you said in your autobiography that there was a moment when it looked like you were going to play Mike, and that didn't happen. People can read your book to find out more about that.
It wasn't just a moment, but anyway.
Okay, yeah. There was a time when. Yeah. But how much of the rest of the filming were you on set for? Was it you handed in the scripts and went away, or were you part of the whole production?
I didn't hand in the scripts because after the very first episode, which I pretty much wrote on my own, the demolition episode, which is the pilot, and there's episode 1 where they think the house is going to be demolished, and Lick crucifies himself in front of the house and starts reading his poetry. After that, the writing, it's a long story, the writing of the young ones, but the scripts tended to be submitted by Rick and Lisa, the other 2 writers. I gave them my stuff. I stepped back from the young ones quite early on because of a fracturing of my relationship with Rick. Not personally, we remained very close friends, but my creative relationship with him fractured for various reasons. But I don't think it's particularly, I talk about them in my autobiography because I love Rick and I miss him dearly, and I miss our creative relationship, and I think it fractured during the young ones. It's funny, it sort of peaked and fractured at the same time. And there are reasons for that you can find out if you want to read it. What it resulted in was me not feeling as close, and my influence on the show waned as it got closer to production. And I didn't hang around much. No, I didn't go on. I was there I didn't go to Bristol much when they made the first one. The rest was, I don't think I ever went with it. I think once I went with them on location, and I went to a few of the recordings. I did a bit of extra writing. One time I went into rehearsals and they were stuck for a scene. So I wrote the laundrette scene where where Aid's socks follow him down the street. They needed that. Yes. So they went off to the pub for lunch, and I wrote that over lunch. But it was great. It was a smash hit. Not everything in it was the way I think it should have been, but you can't argue with a smash hit. Aid and Rick remain, well, Rick's gone now, but my dearest friends, Aid and I, remain dear friends, and I'm very close to Nigel. Well, not very close, but we're friends. I'm very close to Aid. So it's all good, but no, I didn't hang out much with the young ones. I thought some silly decisions were made, but as I say, we had a fantastic hit, flawed, but then perhaps, anything good has to be flawed. Anything has to be flawed. Everything's flawed. There is no perfection.
As a writer, have you ever submitted a script, be it the young ones or anything else, where you're like, I've written it, it's perfect, and then maybe you're not on set, or maybe you are, and the actors are reading it wrong? You know what I mean?
Reading it wrong. It's the lot of the writer to always be frustrated. I think that's why. If you write scripts for other people, and you don't direct it, you're always going to disagree with some things. And I think that's why my dear friend Richard Curtis, ended up directing his own movies, starting with Love Actually, because, he just couldn't sit there any longer trying to persuade the director to do it the way he knew it should be done. And I think when you write comedy, you're pretty clear. And I'm kind of jealous of some of David Mamet. I believe he actually includes every cough and every pause and insists the actors do it. You put a beat here or you're not in it.
Can I tell you a story about this? I don't know if this is true, but this is a story I heard. Another big influence on me was seeing his play Oleanna in the West End. And I was just astonished, having not seen it done like that before, how much drama you could wring out of just two people talking about something that had happened off stage. But in a really interesting... so this might make you think better of Harold Pinter, because Harold Pinter directed that. Which is a really interesting, I think, confluence of theatrical minds. Look, but when he went into rehearsals, the first thing he did was to have the entire script retyped so it had only the dialogue. And all of those stage directions and punctuation and so on to direct the actors from behind the typewriter was gone.
Yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me. Pinter would do that. I mean, he's right. If he's the director, but he would certainly. I mean, if ever there was anybody who would say it's my way or the highway, it would be Pinter. I don't. I would trust Mamet's timing more than I would trust Pinter's timing, because Pinter his writing is it cheats, because it basically puts pauses in, which makes everybody think, oh, that equals enigma, which equals dry wit, but actually it just equals silence. In fact, it needs a. But look, I don't get me wrong. I've also had the most joyful experiences handing my scripts over. So yeah, Blackadder, Young Ones. There were times when I was frustrated that, never with the Young Ones. The Young Ones was performed the way, apart from the character of Mike, which let's not go into. The actor was brilliant, Chris Ryan, but the character and the way it was presented had completely lost its way by the time it got to the screen, and that saddened me greatly, because that could have been a fourth great character. And Chris lavished great love and great talent on it, but it was a completely poisoned chalice. By the time it had kind of gone through a meal that was not of my making. But with the rest of with Rick, Aid and Nigel, I think all the scripts were performed exactly as I would have imagined them to do. And I don't think there was ever much question about the scripts on the set. I don't think they debated it much. I think they should have debated it more, because as I don't think all of the scripts were great. Blackadder, as you know, this kind of myth developed, which I and Richard both find slightly irritating, that there was some kind of wonderful, actors kind of writing room going on during the rehearsal period. There was an awful lot of kind of sucking of cheeks and debating about whether the word wibble was funny enough or not. But on the whole, they pretty much stayed, they got knocked around a bit and then ended up often the same as they've been. Sometimes the odd good bit came up in rehearsal, as indeed it should when clever actors are working with scripts that have been literally tailor-made for their voices and their talents. And sometimes mistakes were made. I mean, I talk about in the book at the time, I think it got to its nadir, this kind of unpacking of scripts and then putting them back together, on Blackadder's Christmas Carol, which I can assure you was much funnier on the page when we submitted it than after it had been torn to bits during a particularly sort of pompous rehearsals week. But much good work was done. And as I say, the great news, I mean, they all remain some of my very closest friends, John Lloyd, the producer, Stephen and Hugh. I'm so, friendships were formed during those quite difficult and edgy times, which have really stood the test of time. And as a writer, getting the chance to write towards those brilliant voices. I mean, sometimes I write into a vacuum. When I write a play or a novel, I'm at the mercy of casting, a director, or in terms of a novel, the imagination of the reader. But when you write towards a sitcom team that who are your friends, your colleagues, whom you work with and respect, it's a joy. So there are lines that I've written for Rowan or for Rick that you could never write for anyone else. They wouldn't be funny, but they are sublime in their mouths. And I felt I thought I had a good ear, as did Richard on Blackadder. On Young Ones, I did an awful lot shaping the character of Rick because Rick's talent excited me so much.
Mm-hmm.
It brought out the best in me. There's just no question in my mind, and I wish that had gone on for longer. I found Rick inspirational as a comic performer, and to a certain extent, Nigel and Aid as well. Their very special comic qualities, unique to them, were an inspiration to a writer. You move on to the Blackadder, same. Writing for Rowan and bringing Rick into the Blackadder. I mean, no other performer could have
Flash Up
done.
must have been written with Rick in mind, right?
Of course, it was written for, and
Yes.
for any question of it being cast with anybody else, and it would never have been a tenth of good had it been so.
Billy Wilder talks about the
Rowan's-
fact that sometimes when casting falls through, he wrote countless scripts with Cary Grant in mind and never got him in one of his films, but they would always revise the dialogue when they had the actor confirmed.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you get I think, if you're dealing with actors who are not comic hurricanes, then, they can be brilliant, but they can also be, somebody else could probably be equally brilliant. If you're writing for a genuinely unique comic star like Rowan, you wouldn't write a script for Rowan and say, oh, we didn't want to do it, I'll give it to Matt Lucas or what? No, because Matt Lucas is brilliant, but he wasn't going to do Rowan stuff. When you write for Rowan, you're writing for a very specific. It's like and inspirational. And Rich Stephen, Melchett. I mean, Melchett could have been played by other actors, but it never would have been as good as Stephen's Melchett. But partly because Stephen is simply brilliant at times, and partly because I and Richard understood that brilliance. There was a simpatico. There is a time and tide in the affairs of writers and actors, and every now and then, it all gels. And I think me and Richard writing Blackadder, and my original relationship with Rick, those were memorable moments when talents combined and produced something bigger than either.
Do you prefer writing for an actor or, as you said, writing into a void? Do you have a preference between writing towards someone's talents or writing from your own creative mind?
I mean, normally I've written really sort of into a void, a play, a musical. I've recast my plays, Popcorn or whatever, numerous times. And with novels, again, you're never, ever able to cast it because the reader's imagination is doing that. So I've done more writing where I don't really know how the outcome is going to sound. I mean, when I write for Rowan or Rick, I haven't done it for, well, Rick's obviously gone, but, I've got a pretty good idea how it's going to sound. I mean, it'll be even better because they'll always find some sublime height to achieve. And I would say that's when you say, what do I prefer? I mean, I write because I write, and it's a kind of ongoing need in me. So preferring doesn't really play much role, but there's no doubt about it. Writing Flash Heart for Rick, knowing what Rick was going to do, and knowing how Rowan would react to Rick. I mean, not knowing exactly, but having a very good understanding, as I say, a simpatico with their talents. I felt we were all locked in. And may I say, as a little parenthesis here, a kind of myth has developed since Rick's death that, Rick won the Blackadder battle in terms of his scenes in the Blackadder. Rick won. He was, he came in and Rowan just had to fade into the background because Rick's moment. And this is a complete myth. Those moments were a group ensemble piece. I mean, Queenie's reactions, Stephen's reactions, but in principle, but specifically Rowan's reactions to Rick playing Flashheart. Is that a canoe in my pocket? Am I pleased to see? Rowan's reactions were absolutely equal and opposite and essential. I think Rowan's performance in the Flashheart scenes of Blackadder is sublime, as is Rick's. I think you have a moment there where you see two absolutely colossal, kind of century-level colossal talents. There's only a handful of that sort of talent in a generation or indeed in a century. And there the two of them are together, and everybody, this idea of, it's all about Flashheart. No, it's all about Flashheart and Rowan and then the rest. And they're all their reaction to him. In particular, Blackadder's reaction to him. I think it's one of the great, it's okay in Blackadder Goes Forth, but Blackadder 2's Flashheart is sublime. And it's sublime because it's Flashheart and Rowan and then the rest. And so writing a scene like that is truly joyful when you have the privilege of working towards and enabling talent that you understand, and when it is at its best, is better than literally anything. Having said that, in that very scene and in that series, you have a talent who nobody ever knew how they were going to sound. And certainly when we wrote it, I knew how Rowan was going to sound, and I knew how Stephen was going to sound, as did Richard. And we were very delighted when they were even better than we imagined. But we had no idea how Queenie would sound, because Queenie was the part that was cast, and one of John Lloyd's greatest moments in his illustrious comic career, most of which has been simply brilliant. Not all, in terms of editing Blackadder, but he made some bloody good decisions on Adder, and I think his best of all was casting Miranda Richardson, who produced a performance of absolute integrity. A massive, weird performance of a woman, skittishly delighted with her own power. And her intonation appears random almost. You don't know where she's going to land a syllable or where she's going to land an emphasis. And we certainly, when we wrote the role, had no idea. It could have been played a number of ways and it probably would have been pretty effective, but I don't think anyone could have produced something as mad and as utterly convincing, a sort of psychopathic child, a coquettish lunatic. I thought Miranda Richardson, the funny thing is, she's the equal of the rest of them, and she's the one we never knew we were writing a classic role. She made it a classic role. It's not on the page. Page is quite funny, but it's a classic role because of what she did with it.
So when you do stand-up, you know exactly whose voice you're writing for, because you're writing for you. And I think I've seen you say, and I've seen other people say about you, that when you started, you developed this sort of motor mouth style in order to just get through it and try to not leave a gap that a heckler could jump into.
That's
but
true,
again, I remember watching you on things like Saturday Live when I was a teenager. And one of the things that really struck me, and maybe as you kind of relaxed into it a little bit more, was how theatrical some of it was and how you'd play with timing. And I remember being incredibly impressed and, quoting this to people in the playground the next day. There's a routine that you did about hell and about what Dante imagines to be in hell. And you sustain the tension for so long. That must have been very exciting to do, knowing the punchline that you had, knowing what you were building up to.
It's so lovely to hear that. My wife would be really cheering you on, because she's always saying, stop running down your stand-up style. You're actually a good stand-up. She thinks she loves
You're an
stand-up.
amazing stand-up.
Well, it's kind of you to say so. And I do tend to say, look, it's all about the words. It's what I say that matters. And I'm an average sort of at the delivery, but because I understand the material, because I've written it, and that's why I'm on stage. Yeah, I think I am probably more of a natural comic doing what I do than I've given myself credit for over the years. I'm quite a good mimic. I can do a little bit of acting in my set. It's a bit over the top, but that's what comedy requires. But when you asked, did it feel great to sort of take that teasy moment? I remember going to the bottom, and then it's the editor of The Sun underneath Judas.
That's the one. Yeah.
And But no, I took no pleasure, just fear, just thinking, can I afford to pause? Can I afford to keep a moment of silence? Because the shadow, as I talk about in the book, the shadow of the gong was so long. Those formative experiences, comparing the Comedy Store in that bear pit, in that horrible tiny little club, that strip club in the day or in the evening, and we were there at midnight. And I did develop a fear of interruption, because my material requires people to follow what I'm saying. You've got to go quite a long. Sometimes you have to go quite a while before I'll drop the laugh in, and then I'm trying to draw a number of things together. And if you miss some of it, and of course, the enemy of everything is the heckler. I never heard a clever heckler. I think all hecklers are idiots. I mean, everyone thinks, oh, there's no tactics.
I so agree. Whenever, just a moment. Whenever, like, you're in an interview and someone was like, what's the best heckle you've ever had? And it's like, they're all bad. They stop. It's like if you went to a theater, like a play, an actual play, and someone stood up and was like, show us your dick. Even if it was in the middle of Pinter, you'd be mad about it.
Yeah, I would. Because that Pinter would be funnier than that. And and this is a problem with Twitter and the internet, because it's legitimized the heckler. I mean, it's no journalist 30 years ago would have thought their job was to quote hecklers after having seen them stand up, but they'll now quote Twitter, saying, oh, so and so stand up at the jury's at. But anyway, let's leave Twitter aside. Thing about live heckling. Yes, occasionally I believe there can be witty put downs, the famous taxi for Mr. So and so or whatever. But even that, so fucking what? I mean, if you interrupt someone in conversation, you can put them down. If you've got, if someone's dying, they'll know, they'll get off stage. I mean, look, I know that there are some comedians who work an audience. That's different. Sort of bants, back and forth. Maybe they're trying to get something. Most comedians have material to deliver, and it will be ruined if somebody interrupts the flow. And if you're a gag teller and your shtick is being combative, I guess, look, maybe there's a place for it. But even then, I mean, everyone uses the same heckle put downs, and it's just nobody pays to listen to some fucking arrogant person at the back shouting, some drunk in the middle. Yeah, nobody's bought a ticket to listen to another member of the audience. It's like people singing along in musicals. You want to say, look, I want to hear the people who actually, So no, I think all heckles are shit, and I hate all hecklers, and particularly for my material, I would say, because I don't really do jokes. I mean, as a compare, I've seen hecklers ruin delicate, sensitive acts. So I've talked about it. Jenny and Dawn did the Comedy Store once. Why would they go on stage when an audience feels empowered to shout, "So show us your tits"? Like, fuck off. I'm not. Well, I just won't do it. I'm not. That's not my job. To react to that. So yeah.
Yes.
I did have to learn a combative style to protect my own material and protect the material of others. I was the compere, and I had to let the small group of bad apples, there's always a few in the audience, know that they were not welcome interrupting people's material incoherently and drunkenly, or indeed even coherently and soberly, but that was even rare. And I think that did scar me, but I'm very pleased, Tom, to hear you think that my delivery is worthy of the material, because it's the material I'm proud of, but I need to deliver it in order for anybody to think it's any good.
Do you ever wish you'd done more acting?
No, because my delivery as a stand-up isn't acting. I mean, it's comic performance. I can do some funny voices, and I can sort of shape. I can use my body to sort of imply something. I've always overacted. I mean, I tell this story that Ken Branagh's only direction to me when I had the little role in Much Ado About Nothing. Everyone else got like 5 minutes of intense notes, and all I got was "Don't act." And that's because I tend to I tend to overact.
Being chosen for the Princess Watch. This is your charge. You are to bid any man stand in the prince's name?
How if he will not stand?
Well, then take no note of him, but let him go.
If he will not stand when he is bidden, he is none of the prince's subjects.
True.
It takes I have no performance vanity. I find movie sets boring unless you're the director, because you're just endlessly waiting for something to happen. Everyone's got a job, and if you're the lighting people, then you get your moment, then you sit around, and particularly the actors waiting for a cloud to pass over them. No, I don't wish I'd done more acting. If I wanted to, I would have done. I am a writer, and the only reason I do stand up is as a vehicle for my material. And it's a very beautiful vehicle. I think stand up is a great art form. I think gag telling is a craft, and it's one I respect, and people look to gag writers, and you can tell. It always makes me laugh a bit when the funniest line in the Fringe is always like a funny line. Because that, no matter how funny it was, that won't be the funniest line in the Fringe. The funniest line at the Fringe will have been some wonderful bit of truth that's been woven together by somebody doing a comic monologue, as it not a series of jokes. The best comedy is born of truth. And to get truth, you have to expose yourself, and you have to explore ideas. You have to explore your own inadequacy and the inadequacy of the world. And so when I'm on stage as a comic, I have the pretty unique privilege of being a writer who can do a completely subjective piece of work. Most writing, you don't want to read a novel which comes solely from the passions and the opinions or the prejudices or whatever of one single individual. You want to see a multitude of ideas represented. Same goes for a play. But when I'm on stage, I'm saying, this is me. This is what makes me angry. This is what makes me happy. This is why I'm scared for the world. This is why I'm scared for myself. One is absolutely, that modern phrase, standing in one's truth. When I'm on stage as a comedian, I am absolutely standing in my truth. And that's a lovely thing to be able to do as a comic writer.
The thing that drew me to stand up is I went to school for musical theater, not writing, the acting bit of it. And I was in New York at the time, and me and a friend decided to go and try and do an open mic at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. It's called the People's Improv Theater, called The Pit. And I one of those things where you think you stormed it and you look back and you're like, oh, I failed miserably, but like the high of it. But for me, I was like, oh, this is it. Because with musicals and theater, although I absolutely love it, it's like I need to get a pianist, and I need to get other actors, and I need to get, this and this and this. But with stand-up, it's just me on stage with a notebook, and whether I show up or not, it's all on me. And that's what I really like about stand-up, is I don't have to rely on a lot of people in order to make the art form. Is that one reason why you started to do stand-up, is in between writing novels and scripts?
I was lucky. I had look, in a way, yes, because when I first started as a stand-up, Young Ones had just been commissioned a pilot episode. It was a year before that was made. So it was absolutely the very beginning of my career, and I needed to make a living, and I also wanted to alert as many people as possible to my ability to be funny. So I definitely did. It was that which you say, which is why a lot of performers go into stand-up, because it's a cheap way of showing your wares. All you need is a pub and a microphone, or if a very small room, you don't even know that. There used to be a gig called the Earth Exchange, which was part of the circuit in the early 80s, and that was small enough not to require a microphone. It was a kind of hippie restaurant. People that basically, if the rice hadn't been sufficiently soaked overnight, people chewed too loudly and they couldn't hear the comedian. But there was no, because everybody was very nice in the Earth Exchange, unlike the Comedy Store. But yes, there was an element of me doing stand-up originally as a cheap art form, the only way available to me to show my wares. But very quickly, I was incredibly fortunate, and suddenly I was writing a sitcom for some of the best young talent in the country, and before I knew it, I was writing another sitcom for the rest of the best young talent in the country, and I had the world as a writer was my oyster. I had access to the best performers. I could put Jennifer Saunders in a thing called Happy Families in 1985. I was only 25. It was a whole comedy drama series starring Jennifer and Dawn and Stephen.
First of all, may I offer my sincerest condolences for your recent bereavement.
Oh, why? Who's dead?
Grant, your husband. Blessed are the meek.
But that was the day before yesterday.
Aha! Yes, that is the point. I notice you still have no plans for the disposal of the body.
Well, I really don't know what else there is I can do. I mean, the dustman absolutely refused to take him away unless he's in a black plastic bin liner.
So I was so fortunate. I had no need to carry on doing stand-up. And originally I did it to put my wares around and to make a bit of a living. And within a year or two, I no longer needed to do either of those two things. And I still hated stand-up. I found it very, very, scary and taxing, as we all do when we start, and I was only, still young at it. But by then I discovered the beauty of really pure stand-up comedy as a medium of ideas. I mean, not gag telling, which is a craft. I mean, I'd say Jimmy Carr, I mean, he writes them. Of course, it's the artistry. I don't know. I'm sure he has some right. I don't know. But the idea of telling a series of ideas in non sequitur, to me, that's kind of a craft, because it's a very honorable and a beautiful craft, but it's a skill, and you need wonderful, either write them yourself or get them from someone else. But they're jokes. They're kind of funny moments. Ping, ping, ping. But for me, stand-up is interesting as a medium of ideas, a medium of exploring. It's like poetry, but with jokes, exploring emotions and feelings and outrage. And I'd already recognized that, hard though it is going on stage in front of an audience, it's a beautiful art form if you can master it. And I think good stand-up is like rap. Like they're beginning to recognize that rap can be poetry. I mean, Kendrick Lamar got some huge literary prize, and I think it's generally agreed that it was deserved, and I'm sure, and I agree. And I think, I'm not saying stand-up comedy is poetry, but it's prose. It can be important stuff. And I've tried to use it as a significant way of seeing the world.
Yeah.
When you do your stand-up, you are, because I've lots of friends who are stand-ups, and I know this is something that varies quite a lot. There are some who will know the shape of the routine, but the exact choice of words will be a little bit different every time. They're slightly improvising around it. And there'll be others who will have not just memorized the words, but the performance will be basically identical every single time. And everyone finds their own place on that continuum. The impression I get is
I think most comics are closer to the latter, i.e. if they're going to do a 60-day tour, the chances of it being largely significantly different each night. I think it'd be significantly different from the first night to the last night, but it's a series of Chinese whispers. I mean, my act, you will see the same thing the second night. I've written it very carefully. How do you feel about this, Abigoliah? I mean, do you go on stage and wing it sometimes? I certainly don't.
Well, actually, yeah, I was like, what is your process? Because you do a lot of script writing. So when I have an idea for a joke, right? So we're talking new material level. It's not finished yet. I will maybe write out the idea a bit and write bullet points, but I don't script out a first draft. I've never scripted out a first draft. I just
and
go
you'll go
by
on stage with that map, and that's all you've got.
Yeah, so I might have a couple of one-liners, or like I'll know the story and I'll tell the story and I'll find jokes within it, and then I record it, and it's not until I get to like draft 2 or 3 that I start to write it. And once I start to write it, which my last director for my last Edinburgh show is the first person to be like, you have to freaking write it as a script. And then that helps me line edit, because that's when I pick up all of my
But
repeats of
between drafts 1,
words.
2, and 3, you're doing it on stage.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, okay. So you've got the first map. You go on stage, you play around, you get a few good laughs. That seemed to work. Oh my God, that died. I didn't get that right. You come
Yeah.
back off, and then you work it on again, and then you. Okay, I think that's perhaps quite a common way of. I think for young, working up material.
Yeah.
That's definitely not how I work. I write a script I write it, and I'm pretty clear where the jokes are the first time. Now, I'm not saying I always get it right, but it is definitely not made in performance. It's made in my head, and then it's performed, and it does morph a bit, and it does begin to change, mainly because I thought things get expanded. It's not that things drop out, just things get added, and suddenly you've got a 3-hour show, and you've got to start, killing your babies, etc. But no, I don't do warm-ups and work up material. I'll do half a dozen warm-ups to learn the material, because it's a 2-hour monologue and it's all on the page, and I need to get it so that I can perform it really well. I need to have it really embedded in my head, and so that will be the warm-ups. But that's learning it, not working on it. I mean, you'll find a few things. Oh, it didn't work as well as I'd hoped, but on the whole, I've done it. I've done all the work before I get on stage, save learning it and performing it, which is a different thing. I'm interested in your method. Maybe I should try it.
Well, I'm interested in your method because, like, I think your method is more rare. I know George Carlin did that. I'm pretty sure Mike Birbiglia does that. But because you come from a background of playwrights, of writing dialogue, you know how to write yourself talking. If I start at script, oh boy, are there words that go on the page that I do not say in my real life. It becomes real flowery and literary. I get smart. I get a thesaurus. You know what I mean? I need to start with like just how I speak, and then I can make adjustments.
And in
But
order to know how you speak, you need to hear yourself saying it. I get that. That's very. I think maybe you'll find. I mean, I'm a little bit older than you by some considerable.
Yeah, please teach me.
And maybe you'll find you're slowly but surely you'll come to be so familiar with your voice, you will find your material is better. Is closer to your voice when you start. I mean, I definitely know when I'm writing something, I know how I'm going to deliver it, and it. As I say, things come, definitely. There's no doubt, because you're writing, improvising onto the page, and sometimes you're on stage and further improvisation occurs. It's all an improvisation. Writing is an improvisation. I used to have this battle with this comedian. I talk about it in the book, actually. It's a funny thing. This comedian, Tony Allen, from the very early days of alternative comedy, he was in the original alternative cabaret in the 70s, going around hippie festivals. And he always hated how my act was the same all the time. It got a lot more laughs than his, because his was he was always just going on stage and free forming. You got a free form, and I never, you sat over and written it and learned it. That's not free your mind, free form. And I never understood why there was sort of some kind of ethical superiority in making it up on stage as opposed to making it up in your bedroom on your little typewriter. I mean, I thought, well, it's all improvisation. At some point, you're making it up. Why is it so wrong for me to make it up earlier and then do a bit of work on it so it actually gets to be funny, as opposed to sort of desperately feeling and finding, I think you probably have a compromise. You've done a lot of work. You've got a lot of good ideas. It's not like you're going on stage just to wing it and see what happens in the room, but you do want to discover the material within the material, I guess.
Yeah.
And I do a bit of that, but I guess it'd be interesting for me to compare the transcript of the tour I started with. I just did a huge long 150 dates, and the end, I think a lot of it would be very similar, except the bits that were cut, because it started going like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
People come and say, "Oh, I saw you twice," and I thought it was exactly the same. And I go, "For fuck's sake, well, you think I can make up 2 hours of the material every night?"
Yeah, people don't go to see We Will Rock You and say this is the same as it was when I saw it a month ago. I want my money back. But I think one of the reasons why people with stand-up in particular have that ethic about it's better if it's improvised is because one of the greatest gifts that a good comedian has is the ability to make something seem spontaneous. I think we want to, as an audience, we want to buy into the illusion that this wonderful person on stage who's got all these incredibly funny ideas is just having a conversation with us. And the idea that it's been planned and written and rehearsed slightly
Of
takes the
course.
magic away from it.
I understand that. And I mean, you don't go on about the fact that, although you get a laugh, you say, that got a laugh last night or whatever.
Yes.
But I totally agree. I mean, I give the impression on stage that I'm not making it up as I go along, but that the ideas, but you see, that's not a lie. I am rediscovering the material each night with the audience. It really isn't a deceit. In order to rediscover the arguments and land the ideas, the words are the same, but if I'd just said them by rote, I mean, with all the intonation, it's like with a bass player. My wife's a bass player, and there's a term for bass players being in the pocket. And basically, if two bass players appear to be playing exactly the same thing, but you know that one of them is kind of funky and groovy, and the other one, there's something wooden about it. And you can't tell what it is, because if you listen to the two, it seems to be they're both playing the same notes exactly the same way. But one of them's in the pocket and one of them isn't. Now, I have to be in the pocket with my material every night. And I think it is like a musician. Like a musician like Brian May or something. He's delivering basically the same solo from Bohemian Rhapsody. I saw him do it live only a few weeks ago. He came to the first night of an opening of We Will Rock You. And there he was, beautiful Brian May, playing this music. And he did do the same notes as are on the record. But, oh my God, it was so originally, he added the odd little diddle here or there. And it was the same, but very different. And I think a good comic delivering the same material each night is exactly like a good musician playing the same song each night. You have to find the truth in it again. You have to find the pocket. You have to get into the pocket. You've got to find that funkiness, that rhythm, the glory of that melody. And if you sort of do it mechanically but brilliantly, audiences know. It just doesn't move them. And I think that's, for what it's worth, even though when I do 6 nights in a row and it's exactly the same every night, it's not exactly the same every night, because I'm rediscovering the ideas as I play it, just as a musician is finding the tune again each night. I mean, it might sound poncy, but I'm trying to come up with a good way to describe the fact that, yes, I do the same show every night, but it's a new show to me.
But I think you're right, because like your wife plays the bass, you play the audience. So like if you go on stage, this is how I see it, which is funny that you call it a pocket, because when it freaking hits, I call it the pocket. I didn't know that was a musical thing. But like what we're, if I may, what we're doing as stand-ups is like you're communicating to the audience, right? So when you're in the pocket, it's like throwing a ball back and forth. You give the material, they laugh, it comes back to you. If you go on stage and like robotically, even if you hit all the marks and the intonation and every time you cork your head like this, but you're not communicating, it doesn't feel as real as your wife communicates with her bass. Yeah.
Exactly. Audiences smell deceit. If you don't rediscover the genuine integrity and the passion of the idea like the first time you did it, then the audience will not be moved by it, no matter how much it's similar it sounds the first time you do it. And you're right. You're in a conversation with the audience, and their laughter is half of the dialogue. And you are instinctively playing, because obviously audiences are not crowds, they're a group of individuals, and obviously any 1,000 people is going to contain the same number of wankers and heroes, and so they're similar each night, but they're also different, and it's that dialogue, it's that, as you say, playing the audience. So but for me, my modus operandi as a stand-up comedian is to write my routine and learn it, and then rediscover it by saying it like an actor going on and doing the to be, Shakespeare to be monologue. They can't just do it. They've got to re-find it, or the audience won't be moved by it. And that's exactly the same, I think, with stand-up. Yes, it's the same as it was last night, but actually it's completely different.
Ben, we should let you go quite soon, but I've just got 2 questions I want to finish on.
Before you ask your questions, I
Yes.
have one very,
Okay.
very important question for you, Ben.
Okay, please.
Shag, marry, kill. Rick, Neil, or Vivian? Go.
Hang on, there's no or. You mean I've got to do something to all of them?
Yeah. Shag, marry, kill, Rick, Neil, and Vivian. You're right.
Oh, well,
Hello, Mr. Writer.
As long as we can say the characters, not the actors, because they're all.
Oh, no. Not your friends and your colleagues. That's inappropriate. We're going here.
I guess they used to say of the young ones that it was one critic, and it got very popular, that it was a nuclear family. It wasn't as a groundbreaking, because really the 4 of them were the sort of 70s young ones family. And the idea was that Mike was the father, Neil was the mother, Aid was the son, and Rick was the daughter. That was how some critic put it, that they reflected the sort of tropes. So the mother is kind of like always worrying about food and like principles and things. Mike's the dad. That's obvious because it was a boring character. Vex, like women often were in sitcoms, kind of petulant and vain, and Aid is like a bloke, and like blokes were in, so in that respect, I guess I'll marry Neil. I'll kill Vivian. Some critic's idea of what the young one's family was.
Lovely.
Thank you for answering that. I appreciate it.
All right,
Tom, to your more worthy questions.
I'm taking Abigoliah on this tour of British comedy, one show at a time. We don't need anyone to tell us that we need to be watching things like Blackadder. The Young Ones was the second show that we watched. Is there anything else that you think we should be watching that we might have overlooked? And you are allowed to pick your own stuff.
Oh, well, if you're talking about from my own work, then all the rest of it. I think you should look at The Thin Blue Line, which was a tribute to studio ensemble sitcoms. And I think you should look at Upstart Crow, which I think is my my best work. I love Upstart Crow with a passion because I loved everything about researching it, writing it, and hearing David and Lisa and that incredible cast deliver. I felt, because I did it in my old age, well, not old age, but late middle, I was much less anxious, much less, it was just fun to do. I loved Crow. If you're talking about other shows, I mean, I'm afraid I have to dig deep. I have to go back. I mean, I think you should look at, I mentioned Till Death Us Depart as one of the most extraordinary. To think that was on mainstream BBC One. I mean, a deconstruction of a racist, of a sort of MAGA type, really. But nonetheless, sympathetically done. Johnny Spate. Interesting, you see, that there was so much working class input. I mean, you, Abigail, you'll be discovering that Britain is still cursed with a kind of class ethic. I mean, even after so many years, that kind of the snootiness and the snobbery still exists. And there really is a feeling of something being working class or middle class. And for me, the 60s sitcom was working class, written by working class people, both Galton and Simpson, Johnny Spate, Spike Milligan, and then in the 70s, and nothing wrong with middle class. I'm middle class. I mean, I'm not saying you should one or the other, but the gritty reality of British sitcom in the 60s really, the stuff that Pinter and all the angry, well, he was slightly later, but from John Osborne to Harold Pinter, there was this idea that these angry, brilliant left-ish young playwrights were exploring the awfulness of life in Britain. But actually, if you wanted them explored properly and you want to see it done with love and humor, as opposed to a kind of brittle nihilism, then I would look at 60s sitcoms, and in particular, I would look at Till Death Us Depart and Steptoe and Son.
We were actually talking, and when I say we, Tom, because he curates everything, of doing a season about class. in just doing sitcoms like that. So that's really helpful.
That would be
Thank
really
you.
interesting. I mean, as I say, and I think I loved The Good Life, despite the fact that I kind of eviscerated it in a monologue I gave to Vivian in The Young Ones. But there's no doubt about it that in the 70s, BBC sitcom did become very, very cozy. The kind of Terry and June model, which could be very funny. But, you know, it forsook any kind of social realism. And what's interesting about sitcom in the 60s and 50s, created by the post-war generation, created by people who'd either served or done national service, a kind of feeling, it was sort of Beveridge welfare state comedy. Slowly but surely, as we got away from life, got more comfortable, the people got more aspirational. Another great working class sitcom would be The Likely Lads, Clement and Lafreniere. I mean, I had some of your listeners will be thinking, oh, for God's sake, then stop talking about working class and middle class. But you can't not in terms of British culture. It does play a part. It plays a part in terms of the critical establishment and in terms of commissioning. And I think the post-war, the post-war consensus, which ended really with Thatcher, I mean, the culture changed as well in terms of sitcom. Yeah, have a look at The Likely Lads and the original Likely Lads in the 60s, and then the brilliant revival in the 70s, Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads, which was about a couple of blokes, one of whom was aspirational and wanted to join the middle class. The other one didn't, or at least claimed he didn't. Have a look at The Likely Lads. Great, great comedy. And also Carla Lane's work. Look at The Liver Birds. If ever there was a sitcom which reflected its time, you know, two working class women going it alone. I mean, Carla Lane, of course, the first great, you know, the first female voice in comedy writing that I can remember, you know. Have a look at The Liver Birds. You're dancing. You're asking. I'm asking. I'm dancing.
And finally, we aren't making any money out of this podcast, not yet anyway. You haven't been offered a fee for appearing. So in lieu of that, what we suggest is that you recommend a charity that you support that you'd like our listeners to donate to.
Oh, what a lovely idea. That's a surprise. I didn't realize that. I certainly would have asked for a fee. This has been fun. Well, in that case, I have a number of charities which I support, and I'm going to name Scope, the charity, biggest disability charity and campaigning group, very, very, very big on campaigning. I am proud to be a patron of Scope. I've been a part of their world since I wrote my novel Gridlock in 1990, which features two people with severe disabilities as the heroes, and that led me to talk to Scope, and I've been with them ever since. So Scope, if you want to throw a few quid somewhere, then by all means do that for us.
Wonderful. And we'll make sure there's a link in the show notes. Ben Elton, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, I'll banged on as I will, but I hope that makes sense. Really nice to meet you both, and I hope we do something else down the road.
Thank you.
Okay? All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
I remember one of his stand-up tours was called Motormouth.
Yeah.
And that's not inappropriate. I mean, in many ways, he's the ideal podcast guest, isn't he? Because you ask him one question and he gives you this incredibly erudite, thoughtful monologue for 10 minutes. I mean, It's perfect. Absolutely perfect.
It's great. It makes our job so easy, and he's just got good stories and a good way with words. Maybe it's because he spent his whole life writing them down, but
and I was struck by the conversation that you and he had about your different approaches to stand-up, because actually I think, just judging on the sample of my friends who are stand-ups, your working methods are more typical, but you know, everybody finds their own thing that works for them.
Yeah, it does make me want to try to write it and learn it before I go out, like try it for a bit of new, like from the very beginning, because eventually it does become memorized, but he memorizes it from the start.
Yeah.
I did want to suggest, I was like, I'm going to try it your way, you try it my way, but I didn't.
Yes.
I didn't get that in.
Stuart Lee, for example, talks about the fact that if what he's planned to do in a routine is sort of lose his way and lose his place, the best way he can do that is to kind of think himself into genuinely losing his way.
Mm-hmm.
And so those bits will always come out differently every single time, even though it will always happen at that exact moment. And that kind of artifice I find very interesting. So we haven't seen Bottom yet.
No.
But Bottom is Rick and Aid after the young ones. And there are 5 Bottom live stage shows, all of which were recorded for video, which is just the 2 of them on stage for 2 hours, but it is like a live sitcom.
Oh, cool.
In every single one of those, there is at least one moment where they forget a line, go off script, start improvising. I don't know, because I wasn't there, but my guess is if you'd seen 2 consecutive performances, they'd have gone off script in pretty much the same way, at pretty much the same point in every performance.
It's probably one of those things that they found in rehearsal and then they kept in.
Or in early performances in front of audiences.
Yeah. I remember...
But that gift of seeming to be spontaneous is very valuable. There's an old story that when the Marx Brothers were performing on Broadway, the niece of one of the writers came to see the show and flipped through the script lying on his bed in his hotel room before they went to see it. And she said afterwards, if I had not read that script, I would have sworn Groucho was making up every single line on the spot.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I do a lot of emceeing. And sometimes I have people who are like, oh, I love watching you MC. There are certain clubs I do it quite regularly at. And they're like, I come every time you MC. Which is interesting because if they came every time I did a set, I'd be really happy about that, even if I repeated material. But when people are like, I come and watch you MC every time, I'm like, oh no, you know the tricks. Because it looks like, oh my God, I can't believe she just thought of that. But like audiences are so predictable. There are certain just one-liners and like little chat backs that you can just have in your back pocket that you can just throw out at any moment, and people think you've made it up in the moment, and you haven't. You haven't. Shh. Listeners, don't tell anyone. Well, guys, that was Ben Elton. We really appreciate you.
This was such an amazing way to start this interview strand. So we really hope that we're going to be able to keep doing more of these, and that they will kind of be a good complement to the conversations that Abigoliah and I are having about these shows. So, if you're somebody who makes comedy and you feel like you'd like your voice on the show, this would be a great way of doing it. So do please get in touch. You can send us an email at allbritishcomedy@gmail.com.
It also, just to throw this out there, it really helps if not only you do comedy, but you have done something with one of the shows we cover.
Yes. Yeah. But we can, the schedule is still fairly flexible.
Yeah. We're learning this as we go. Guys, thank you so much for listening. As always, if you haven't subscribed on your podcatcher app, please do. Take a moment, leave us a 5-star review, and that helps other people find the podcast. And if you liked it, maybe recommend it to a friend, a family member, an enemy, really anyone. Word of mouth is how we're trying to get this podcast out in the world. So please let people know about it.
And we're on TikTok and Blue Sky and Threads and Substack. So come and find us and be part of the conversation.
And should we tell them who our next interview is going to be? Our next show, our next interview? So the next show we're covering is Victoria Wood as Seen on TV. Tom, explain who's coming up in the interview after.
Well, Victoria Wood was extremely lucky to have such a good pair of hands navigating her through the choppy waters of the BBC. And Ben Elton has a pretty impressive comedy pedigree, but this man's certainly rivals it and possibly even leaves it in the shade. It's comedy producer and director Jeff Posner.
And Jeff has worked with everyone, including Victoria, including Ben.
Yep.
Just... if you've seen something on the BBC in like the 80s and 90s, and even probably maybe not 70s, he did it.
Yeah.
He did it. So yeah. Till next time, guys, I'm Abigoliah.
And I'm Tom. Cheerio. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
You have been listening to All British Comedy Explained with Abigoliah Schamaun, Tom Salinsky, and our special guest, Ben Elton. It was a Spontaneity Shop production for the internet. Find us online at allbritishcomedy.com, join our Facebook group, sign up to our mailing list, or follow us on Instagram or TikTok. Join us next time for episode 5, Victoria Wood as seen on TV. Ben Elton's book, What Have I Done? My Autobiography, is now available wherever books are sold. And there's a link to buy it on Amazon in our show notes.